"Fly this plane and I'll marry you," Lauren Whitfield announced, her voice slicing through the sharp Denver wind with the precise arrogance of someone who'd never been told no in her life. The rooftop of Aerodyne Horizon's headquarters glittered with chrome glass and the collective smugness of 30 executives who erupted into laughter the moment the words left her mouth. She gestured dramatically toward the AX-9 Falcon prototype, a $20 million experimental aircraft gleaming beneath the morning sun like a trophy built specifically to remind everyone how small they were compared to her family's aerospace empire. Darius Cole stood a few feet away, one gloved hand gripping a damp cleaning cloth, dirty water dripping onto the concrete in steady, humiliating taps. He wasn't supposed to be on the flight deck at this hour. Janitors weren't supposed to be seen at all, really, but Lauren had spotted him rolling his cart across the far edge and seized the opportunity to create yet another viral moment, showcasing her particular brand of corporate dominance. She flicked the keys at him with the effortless cruelty of someone tossing scraps to a dog, the metal clattering against his boot before spinning to a stop. "Go on, Darius. Pick them up," she said, taking a step closer, her white blonde hair catching the sunlight, her designer heels clicking with theatrical precision. Phones rose into the air like a synchronized salute. No one wanted to miss the CEO's morning entertainment. A few executives whispered jokes about him confusing the flight joystick with a mop handle. Others nudged each other, already crafting captions for their inevitable LinkedIn humble brags. Darius lowered himself slowly, every movement deliberate, controlled, betraying none of the heat boiling beneath his calm exterior as he retrieved the keys from the concrete. His broad shoulders tightened beneath his worn Navy uniform, the same uniform Lauren had mocked just last week for being depressingly utilitarian. He rose without saying a word, meeting her gaze with eyes that were steady, dark, and far too focused for a man she believed incapable of understanding anything more complex than a janitorial checklist. Lauren stepped even closer, invading his personal space with the sweet synthetic bite of her perfume, the kind that cost more than his weekly paycheck. Imagine this man, this minimum-wage hero, trying to pilot avionics that cost more than his entire life's earnings, she said loudly enough for the furthest executive to hear. Another wave of laughter rolled across the rooftop, bouncing off the glass walls like applause. "You probably think the throttle is the thing that makes the seat go up." More laughter. Even the interns laughed, eager to impress. Darius said nothing, but something flickered in his eyes, brief, sharp, and unsettling before he quietly slipped the keys into his pocket, ignoring the gasps and snickers that followed. He didn't smile. He didn't argue. He simply looked at the Falcon, then at Lauren, as if committing every detail of this moment to memory. What Lauren Whitfield failed to notice, what every executive on that rooftop failed to see, was that the janitor she'd just used as a punchline had once flown machines far deadlier and far more complex than the Falcon, and the man they were laughing at had just become the most dangerous person on that rooftop. 6 months earlier, long before Lauren Whitfield decided to humiliate him on a rooftop, Darius Cole had pushed his janitorial cart through the silent, gleaming halls of Aerodyne Horizons on another graveyard shift that paid him $16 an hour and cost him 10 years of his life in headaches, tremors, and memories he could never outrun. The building, a 47-story monument of glass and steel piercing the Denver skyline, seemed to hum with secrets at night, the kind that lived behind locked boardroom doors and encrypted servers. It had been only 3 weeks since Lauren's father, Elias Whitfield, had died in a so-called weather-related aviation accident in the Rocky Mountains, though Darius had flown long enough to know that the sky didn't just swallow aircraft whole without leaving fingerprints. The company had mourned in press releases, stock prices had dipped, and Lauren had stepped into the CEO role with a smile so polished it should have cracked under the pressure of a $3 billion aerospace empire sitting on her shoulders. On this particular night, she was working late in the executive suite, reviewing classified prototype data, flight simulations, and contract renewals for the upcoming Federal Aeronautics Summit. Darius, moving silently across the marble floor with his mop, noticed the scattered documents on the mahogany conference table: schematics for the AX-9 Falcon, maintenance logs, machine learning flight diagnostics. Numbers always spoke to him, even when he pretended they didn't. He wiped the floor methodically, though his eyes drifted to a line on one of the logs. Flight hours logged 1422, engine runtime hours 1054. The discrepancy hit him like static down his spine. Engines don't magically skip 400 hours of wear. Not legally, anyway. He froze, staring at the mismatch, feeling something tighten behind his ribs. Just then, Lauren stepped out of her glass-walled office, arms crossed, expression cold enough to frost metal. "Enjoying the reading material, Darius?" she asked. Her tone dipped in annoyance and superiority as she approached, her heels tapping like a countdown. He straightened. "Just doing my job, ma'am," she smirked, brushing past him. "These systems are more complicated than anything you've ever touched. Don't strain yourself." Before he could respond, footsteps echoed down the hall. CFO Caleb Warren, usually composed and unshakable, entered the boardroom with a trembling hand, clutching a tumbler of whiskey. His salt-pepper hair looked uncharacteristically disheveled. His voice strained as he spoke. "Lauren, we have to finalize the Daedalus contract before the 22nd. If we don't secure the $480 million deal, we'll lose our military partnerships." Lauren waved him off, not taking her eyes off Darius, as if daring him to look again at the documents. "My father built this company. I'm not letting anything fall apart." Caleb's gaze flicked toward the Falcon's blueprint spread across the table, and something, fear, calculation, guilt, passed across his face. "Your father trusted the right people," he muttered. Then he noticed Darius. "We shouldn't discuss this around staff." Darius continued mopping, but his pulse quickened. Something was wrong. Something deeply wrong. And whatever it was, it had started long before Lauren mocked him on that rooftop, because the truth, buried beneath falsified logs and whispered hallway conversations, was that Elias Whitfield hadn't just died. He had been silenced. And tonight, the first crack in that silence had appeared. Caleb Warren's warning hung in the air long after he and Lauren disappeared into her corner office, leaving Darius alone with the echo of their footsteps and a faint scent of expensive whiskey lingering like a question he wasn't supposed to ask. As he wrung out his mop, he noticed something smeared near the emergency stairwell door, a thin, dark red streak glistening under the fluorescent lights. At first glance, it looked like spilled wine or rust, but when Darius crouched down and touched it with the tip of his glove, the texture and viscosity told him otherwise. It wasn't building fluid. It wasn't paint. It was aviation hydraulic fluid, specifically the type used in high-pressure flight control systems, the kind that turned red when contaminated with stabilizers or foreign compounds. His pulse quickened. Aircraft-grade hydraulic fluid had one place to exist: inside an aircraft, not on the 47th floor of a corporate tower. As he wiped the stain, trying to keep his expression neutral in case cameras were watching, someone approached from behind. Megan Ruiz, the HR director, looked exhausted, clutching a thick folder marked "Confidential" with fingers that trembled slightly from either fatigue or fear. "Long day," she whispered, offering him a sympathetic smile, her dark eyes heavy with something unspoken. "Always," he replied, lowering his voice. She glanced toward Lauren's closed office, then leaned closer. "She's getting worse, you know. Ever since Elias—" Megan hesitated, swallowing hard. "Ever since the accident, she hasn't been sleeping. She's been working 18-hour days, firing staff she doesn't recognize, lashing out at board members." Darius nodded but didn't comment. Janitors weren't supposed to have opinions about CEOs. As Megan shifted the folder in her arms, a page slipped halfway out, just long enough for him to see the title before she pushed it back inside. Last Will and Testament of Elias Whitfield. His breath caught, but before he could ask anything, Megan straightened abruptly. I shouldn't be saying anything. I need to get this to legal before morning. Be careful tonight, Darius. Her voice cracked just slightly, as though she knew something terrible was coming but couldn't say it. She hurried down the hall. Darius resumed cleaning, but his thoughts churned like an active rotor. Contaminated hydraulic fluid, falsified flight logs, an unsteady CFO, a hidden will. Then Caleb's voice drifted from behind Lauren's office door, muffled but urgent. The 22nd is the deadline. Everything depends on that flight. Investors, insurance, the Daedalus contract. It all hinges on you making it to Austin, Lauren snapped back, her tone sharp. I said everything is under control. You worry too much. No, Caleb insisted, his voice cracking. I worry exactly enough. If something goes wrong, it'll be catastrophic. Catastrophic. The word clawed its way into Darius's memory, dragging with it the exact tone commanders used before missions that ended in funerals. He slipped into the restroom to dump his mop water, catching his reflection in the mirror, dark circles under his eyes, jaw clenched, shoulders tight. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small amber pill bottle, staring at the familiar label. Sertraline 100 milligram. The nightmares weren't getting better. The tremors weren't fading, and aircraft, especially sabotaged ones, still triggered the ghosts he carried. He swallowed the pill dry, wiped his face, and stepped back into the hall as Lauren and Caleb's argument escalated. He pushed his cart forward, blending into the background as always, but his mind wasn't on cleaning anymore. Something dangerous was forming inside Aerodyne Horizons, a threat hidden behind corporate polish and executive smiles. And though no one noticed him, Darius saw everything. Darius pushed his cart toward the maintenance elevator, but before he reached it, his phone buzzed in his pocket, a vibration too sharp, too deliberate to ignore, and when he slid it out, an unknown number flashed across an empty screen, followed by a single text message that drained all warmth from his blood. Stop digging, or you'll end up like Elias. The words pulsed like a threat carved into bone. For a moment he stood perfectly still, the hum of the building loud in his ears. But then he deleted the message, forced his breathing even, and resumed pushing the cart as though nothing had happened. He'd received threats before in uniform, overseas, under fire, but those came from enemies who wanted him dead for a reason. This one came from someone hiding in the same building he cleaned every night. As he turned the corner, he nearly collided with an intern who dropped a stack of drone prototype folders, apologizing frantically before scrambling away. But the distraction didn't break the tension tightening inside his chest. He reached the 45th floor, where quiet reigned like an uneasy truce. And that's when he noticed the second anomaly of the night. The door to the avionics lab was slightly ajar, despite strict policy that it remain locked at all times. Darius paused, listening for movement, then nudged the door with his foot just enough to peek inside. The lights were on, humming low, casting a sterile glow over tables lined with circuit boards, flight processors, microchips, and maintenance terminals. But one terminal stood out, the Falcon's diagnostic console. Lines of code scrolled across the screen, red text highlighting error states the system shouldn't even detect unless someone had manually bypassed safety protocols. He stepped inside, careful not to disturb anything, scanning the screen. HYD pressure compensation failure, data override detected, runtime log altered. His jaw tightened. Someone was tampering with the aircraft at the software level, not just the mechanical level. That meant the sabotage wasn't sloppy or impulsive. It was layered, practiced, and intentional. Then a sound echoed down the hallway footsteps, fast, approaching. Darius ducked behind a tall storage unit just as Caleb Warren entered, breath uneven, eyes jittery like a man walking through a nightmare he'd created. Caleb went straight to the console, typing frantically, muttering under his breath. They said the logs had to match. If she sees the discrepancy, everything falls apart. If she cancels the flight, I'm dead. I'm dead either way. He wiped his forehead, trembling. The 22nd has to look like an accident, a tragic, unavoidable malfunction. Nothing traceable, nothing suspicious. And then, as though the universe wanted to strike Darius twice in the same night, Caleb's phone rang. He answered immediately, voice cracking. I told you I'm doing everything you asked. No, I'm not backing out. I know what's at stake. My family, please, just give me until the 22nd. I'll make sure she goes up. I'll make sure she doesn't come down. Darius felt his stomach drop, as if gravity itself had shifted. Not only had Elias's death been engineered, Lauren's life was now on the clock. Caleb ended the call, slammed his fist against the console, and staggered out of the room. Darius remained hidden until the elevator doors closed behind him, then stepped forward slowly, his pulse hammering in his throat. The pieces were aligning into something far deadlier than corporate politics. Someone had sabotaged the aircraft. Someone had killed Elias Whitfield, and now they were planning to finish the job with Lauren, unless Darius stopped it. The next morning arrived heavy with the weight of everything Darius had uncovered, yet the building moved as if nothing beneath its polished surfaces was rotting from the inside. Aerodyne Horizons buzzed with its usual corporate choreography assistants clutching tablets, executives drifting between meetings, interns power-walking like their lives depended on it. In the center of the lobby, beneath the 30-foot glass atrium, Lauren Whitfield stood before 50 regional managers, delivering her quarterlies with a smile so bright it bordered on manic, her voice echoing across marble floors that Darius had buffed only hours earlier. He tried to slip past unnoticed, but Lauren's gaze snapped toward him like a hawk spotting prey. Speaking of operational efficiency, she said loudly, projecting her words so they bounced through the hall. Let's demonstrate what happens when we lower hiring standards. A ripple of laughter followed as she walked straight toward him, heels striking the marble like gunshots. This man, she gestured at him with a perfectly manicured hand, has been here 3 years. 3 years of pushing a mop, emptying trash cans, and still can't manage to stay invisible. Tell me, Darius, have you learned anything about aviation in all that time? The managers chuckled on cue, some already lifting phones to film. Darius kept his eyes down, jaw tight. He wanted to walk away, but then Lauren grabbed a steaming cup of coffee from a nearby executive, held it up with theatrical disdain, and poured it directly onto the section of floor he had just finished cleaning. The dark liquid spread like a stain across white marble. Clean that up, she said coldly. Darius straightened, leveling his gaze at her with a calm so deep it bordered on eerie. That is deliberate destruction of— Clean it up, Lauren snapped, each word punctuated with venom. Or clear out your locker. The room went silent, then pulsed with the thrill of impending spectacle. Someone whispered, "Is this going on LinkedIn or TikTok?" Before he could think, Darius dropped to his knees, the impact echoing through the lobby, his hands gripping a stack of paper towels as he began blotting the coffee slowly, methodically, like a man burying his pride with each swipe. Phones recorded from every angle. The caption had already been drafted in people's heads. CEO puts janitor in his place. Lauren hovered over him, her shadow stretching across his hunched figure. This is why Aerodyne hires the best, she announced to her audience. Not whatever this is. From the mezzanine above, Darius caught a glimpse of Caleb Warren speaking urgently into his phone, his voice low and frantic. Yes, the 22nd. Everything's in place. The hydraulic failure will look natural. She won't feel a thing. Even through the humiliation, even with blood roaring in his ears from the sting of Lauren's cruelty, Darius heard every word with perfect clarity because he had trained himself for years to hear danger beneath noise. Megan Ruiz rushed through the crowd, kneeling beside him with a handful of towels, whispering, "Here, let me help." Lauren's heel slammed down inches from Megan's hand. "He doesn't need help. He needs to learn his place." Megan stood, but as she rose, she slipped something into Darius's palm, a small brass key. Her lips barely moved as she mouthed, "Elias's office, tonight." The managers began to disperse, returning to their meetings with satisfied smirks and new gossip to chew on, but the moment had already been immortalized on several live streams. Darius finished cleaning the floor, rose slowly, and met Lauren's icy stare without flinching. "Better," she said, brushing past him. "Maybe in another 3 years you'll learn to do it right the first time." He said nothing, but the tremor in his hands present every day since Fallujah was suddenly gone. Something inside him had shifted, not broken, activated, because now he had proof, a key, a deadline, and a decision that would change all of their lives. 2 nights before the 22nd, with the building quiet and the city outside wrapped in the cold hum of midnight, Darius wheeled his janitorial cart onto the executive floor, knowing exactly what he needed to do, and knowing that whatever he found inside Elias Whitfield's private office would either confirm his worst fears or unravel every assumption he had about this company. The brass key Megan had slipped into his hand during the lobby humiliation felt heavier in his pocket than any weapon he had ever carried overseas. At 2:04 a.m., he reached the door marked E. Whitfield Founding CEO, retired, and slipped the key into the lock. The click echoed like a gunshot in the silence. The room smelled of old leather, cedar, and the faint trace of Elias's signature cologne, untouched since his death. Even the air felt different in here, as if it still carried secrets waiting to be disturbed. Moonlight bled through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating framed flight certificates, prototype models, and a massive oak desk neatly lined with aviation manuals, operational binders, and military-grade folders. Darius got to work with the efficiency of a man trained to search under pressure. Desk drawers, picture frames, vents, behind books. Nothing. Until he picked up a thick, dusty aviation manual Composite Flight Safety Regulations, 2006 edition, and felt the weight shift unnaturally in his hands. Inside, the center pages had been hollowed out to conceal a small black flash drive, marked simply, "Insurance." His pulse jumped. He inserted the drive into Elias's old desktop computer, which hummed back to life with a soft, mechanical sigh. Folders appeared instantly: insurance policies, personal notes, surveillance logs, sabotage reports. Darius clicked the first folder and nearly stopped breathing. Insurance policy, A47812F, beneficiary Caleb Warren. Event trigger aviation fatality of Lauren Whitfield, interim CEO. Payout $95,000. Effective date 16 days before Elias's crash. His stomach turned. He opened another file, Elias's private notes. Caleb's debt increasing. Contact with Daedalus investors suspicious. Possible leak. Possible threat to Lauren. Must recruit external protection without alerting board. And then a final line. Hire DC for oversight. Trust his eyes. Trust his judgment. Darius stared at the initials, the implication hitting him with silent force. Elias hadn't hired a janitor by accident. He had placed a soldier inside his own home. But why hadn't Elias warned Lauren? Why had he kept everything hidden? Before he could process further, the elevator dinged outside the office. Light footsteps. A man mumbling. Darius yanked the flash drive free, killed the monitor, and slid behind a tall bookshelf just as Caleb Warren stumbled in, drunk and trembling, clutching his phone like a lifeline. "I need more time," he whispered hoarsely into the receiver. "The money. I can get it after the 22nd. Please, don't hurt my daughter." His hand shook so violently he spilled half the whiskey on the carpet. "No, I said the plane is ready. The hydraulic compound is inside the control lines. It'll crystallize at high altitude. She won't suffer. It'll be like her father." Darius felt the world tilt. Caleb's breath hitched as he stared out the window toward the rooftop helipad. "I'm sorry, Elias. They gave me no choice. The gambling, the threats. They showed me photos of Emma's school. What was I supposed to do?" When Caleb finally staggered out, tears streaking his face, Darius emerged from hiding, adrenaline burning through him. The truth was now complete. Elias had been murdered. Lauren was next, and Darius, unwilling or not, had been chosen to stop it. Darius moved through the darkened stairwell toward the rooftop, every step echoing with the weight of what he had just witnessed, his mind calculating possibilities the way it once did in combat zones where seconds decided who went home and who didn't. When he pushed open the heavy steel door leading to the helipad, the night air slapped him awake, cold and sharp, carrying the faint chemical scent of hydraulic fluid that did not belong outdoors. The AX-9 Falcon sat under the rooftop floodlights like a sleeping giant, sleek and pristine on the outside, poisoned on the inside. He approached the aircraft quietly, pausing to scan for cameras. The only security guard assigned to this level was currently on break, a schedule Darius knew by heart after 3 years of silently watching everyone's routines. He crouched by the maintenance access panel and lifted it with practiced ease, exposing the hydraulic control lines that fed the Falcon's flight surfaces. The fluid coating the lines was wrong, thicker, stickier, faintly metallic, exactly what Caleb had described through desperate whispers. This wasn't just tampered hydraulic fluid. It was a compound engineered to crystallize when exposed to cold, thin, high-altitude air, locking the controls and sending the aircraft into an unrecoverable dive. But Darius couldn't simply drain it. If Caleb or the people controlling him saw discrepancies in the levels or composition, they would accelerate their plan or change methods entirely. He needed a fix that would fool a saboteur but save a pilot. His hands moved automatically, guided by training he had sworn he would never use again. He retrieved a small bottle of standard MILH 83282 fluid from his cart, something he always carried for emergencies unrelated to this, and carefully added just enough into the system to alter the compound's crystallization threshold. Not enough to prevent failure, but enough to delay it. Instead of locking up at 11,000 feet midway to Austin, the controls would seize around 3,500. Low enough for an emergency auto-rotation or forced landing, but only if the pilot recognized the signs and acted immediately. The problem was Lauren Whitfield. She was skilled, but not disciplined under pressure, not trained for catastrophic hydraulic loss. She needed instructions, clear, precise, idiot-proof. Darius knelt on the cold rooftop, pulled a small spiral-bound notebook from his uniform pocket, and began writing a step-by-step survival guide, symptoms of impending hydraulic failure, emergency throttle settings, rotor RPM targets, collective management, flare timing at 40 feet AGL. Lines of memory and trauma flowed through his pen checklists drilled into him by instructors, reinforced by missions that ended in smoke and screaming. When he was finished, he tore out the pages, folded them tightly, and slid them inside a laminated maintenance sleeve he found in the cockpit's side compartment. But he wasn't done. He hesitated only a moment before reaching into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulling out a worn challenge coin, heavy with history, engraved with "Night Stalkers Don't Quit 160th Soar." He ran his thumb across the lettering, the metal warm from years of being carried as both comfort and punishment. Then he placed it on top of the instructions so Lauren wouldn't ignore them. Had she seen the coin before? No. But she would know it meant something real, something military, something beyond janitorial skills. As he stepped back from the aircraft, the rooftop lights flickered slightly and an uneasy silence settled over the city below. His phone buzzed again. Another text, another threat. This time, "We know what you're doing. The 22nd is unavoidable. Walk away, soldier." Darius stared at the screen, then at the aircraft he had just altered. They were wrong. The 22nd wasn't unavoidable. Not anymore. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was running from his past. He felt like he was walking straight into it. By the time dawn crept over the Denver skyline on the 21st, Darius hadn't slept in nearly 48 hours, running purely on adrenaline, black coffee, and the grim determination of a man who had already accepted that tomorrow might be the day he died, trying to save someone who thought he wasn't worth the dirt on her shoes. Aerodyne Horizons buzzed with frantic preparation for Lauren Whitfield's high-stakes flight to Austin. Assistants scurried through hallways clutching binders, catering staff rushed in steaming trays for the pre-flight briefing, and security teams swept the building with heightened urgency that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with optics. Lauren stood in the executive lobby, reviewing flight plans with characteristic impatience, clipboard in hand, designer sunglasses perched atop her head despite being indoors. Investors from Daedalus Aerospace were scheduled to meet her immediately upon landing, and any delay threatened to unravel a contract worth nearly $500 million, an amount large enough to drown out any lingering doubt she felt about piloting the Falcon herself. Darius pushed his cart behind her, trying to time his approach so he could slip into the cockpit unnoticed and place the instructions where she would find them. But the timing was impossible. Lauren was surrounded by executives, interns, and her assistant, Jordan, who hovered nervously with her daily iced coffee. Then fate handed Darius a window. Literally. Jordan, distracted by a barrage of texts, walked directly into Darius's cart. The iced coffee flew upward, arcing through the air in slow motion before splattering spectacularly across Lauren's pristine flight suit, dripping down the front like a bad abstract painting. The lobby froze. Lauren's face twisted from shock to volcanic fury in a heartbeat. Jordan stammered, apologizing with a voice cracking like glass. Darius stepped forward, instinctively mumbling, "Sorry, ma'am. That was my—" "Save it," Lauren snapped, wiping her face with a trembling hand. "You incompetent idiot. This suit cost more than your annual salary." She looked down at the dripping mess, jaw clenched. "I have to fly in less than 20 minutes. "There's a spare in your office," Jordan whispered, voice trembling. "I'll bring it." Lauren glared at Darius with a venom that bordered on unhinged. "You're fired! Security will escort you out after my flight." She stalked toward the private elevator, heels leaving angry clicks across the marble. But those 20 minutes she needed to change were all Darius needed. While Lauren changed upstairs and Caleb paced the lobby on another hushed, panicked phone call. "Yes, she'll be in the air soon. Yes, nothing's changed. Yes, the 22nd is happening." Darius slipped through a side corridor toward the rooftop. As predicted, the helipad security guard was still on break. Darius knew the schedule down to the minute. He jogged to the Falcon, heart hammering, and climbed inside. The cockpit smelled of metal and cold composite, sending a flash of panic through him. But he forced his breathing under control. He placed the folded emergency instructions on the pilot's seat, weighing them down with the challenge coin. Then, thinking fast, he pulled out his phone, switched on the voice recorder, and tucked it under the co-pilot seat cushion. If anything went wrong, there would be evidence. As he closed the cockpit door, he hesitated, hands trembling with a mixture of fear and memory. Flying had once been his entire identity, his lifeline. Now, even touching a cockpit made his chest tighten, but this wasn't about him. It was about stopping a murder. He returned to the stairwell just as Lauren, freshly dressed, stepped out of the elevator with a fury barely concealed under forced professionalism. She never saw him slip away. Upstairs, engines would soon roar to life, And somewhere on the 12th floor, Caleb was calling the people who owned him, promising that everything was still on schedule, never knowing that Darius had just changed the ending. The morning of the 22nd dawned crisp and deceptively calm, the kind of sky pilots dreamed of and saboteurs counted on, and by 7 a.m., the rooftop helipad of Aerodyne Horizons vibrated with the rising whine of the AX-9 Falcon's engines as Lauren Whitfield performed her pre-flight checks with the confidence of someone who had never once considered she might not make it back. Caleb Warren hovered nearby like a ghost trapped between panic and dread, sweat shining on his forehead despite the cool mountain air. He kept glancing at his watch, then at the sky, then at the stairwell, as though the clock itself could kill him if Lauren didn't lift off on schedule. Darius moved through the building below, pushing his janitorial cart with a calmness that belied the storm inside him, keeping his distance while staying close enough to react if anything changed. He positioned himself in the executive boardroom, where the flight tracker was already pulled up on a large monitor showing the Falcon's intended route to Austin, a smooth ascent to 11,000 feet, a straight glide over the plains, and a textbook landing for the Daedalus contract signing. Only Darius knew that the difference between 11,000 feet and 3,500 spelled life or death. At 8:12 a.m., Lauren approached the aircraft, helmet tucked under her arm, still seething from the coffee incident, but determined not to let anything jeopardize her corporate triumph. As she climbed into the cockpit, she paused. The folded instructions and challenge coin lay neatly on her seat. She frowned, picking them up. The moment her eyes landed on the first line, "If your hydraulic pressure begins to drop unexpectedly, you have seconds to respond." She froze. She read the next line, then the next. Her breathing hitched. She turned the coin over, reading the engraved words, "Night Stalkers don't quit." She whispered, "What the hell?" But there was no time to question it. Behind her, Caleb approached the aircraft, voice cracking. "Everything okay?" Lauren stiffened. "Fine. Just checking the controls." She tucked the instructions into her flight suit pocket and the coin into her glove compartment. Darius watched from behind the tinted boardroom glass as the Falcon's rotors gained momentum. The vibration rattled through him, pulling memories of Fallujah to the surface spinning rotors, smoke, children screaming, but he kept his breathing steady, eyes locked on the climbing altitude numbers. The Falcon lifted off smoothly, gliding upward above the Denver skyline. 1,000 feet, 2,000. The city shrank beneath her. 3,000. In the boardroom, Caleb's hands trembled so violently, he dropped his phone. Please, just go higher," he whispered, voice cracking with a desperation that made the executives around him uneasy. Then, at 3,450 feet, Lauren's voice crackled through the emergency radio frequency Darius had secretly synced to his phone. "Tower, this is Falcon 1. I'm experiencing stiffness in the controls. Hydraulic pressure is dropping. Requesting guidance." Static filled the room. Caleb's face drained of color. "No, not now. Not this low." Darius stepped forward, watching the tracker. 3,380 feet, 3,210. The descent was controlled, she was doing it. She was using his instructions. "Falcon 1 attempting auto-rotation," Lauren said, voice strained but steady. "Following emergency procedures." Then a beat, softer, shaken. "Someone put these steps in my cockpit. Who?" Static swallowed the rest, but the coordinates on the tracker confirmed she was guiding the aircraft toward Riverside Ridge Park, the only open clearing in the area large enough for a forced landing. Darius whispered to himself, "Come on, come on." He had flown through fire, through explosions, through missions no one lived through. But this, watching someone else fight for survival using his words, hit deeper than anything in his military years. The altitude dropped rapidly, then stabilized. 2,900 feet, 2,100, 1,400. Caleb collapsed into a chair, hands over his face, sobbing, "They're going to kill my daughter. Oh, God, they're going to kill her." Darius didn't look at him. He watched the final altitude drop. 900, 500, 120. Then the radio burst alive once more. Falcon 1 landing in the park. Emergency crews requested. I'm okay. Forced landing successful. The boardroom exploded into gasps. Some cried. Some stared in awe. Caleb stared at the floor. And Darius, exhausted, trembling, relieved, closed his eyes, letting out a breath he'd been holding for 7 years. Lauren Whitfield was alive. But the war behind her near death was about to begin. The boardroom erupted with overlapping chaos executives shouting into phones, assistants rushing to alert PR teams, and security scrambling to coordinate with first responders. But Darius remained still, eyes fixed on the blinking tracker, confirming Lauren Whitfield's emergency landing in Riverside Ridge Park. His heartbeat finally slowing from the relentless pounding that had carried him through the morning. He barely had a second to breathe when the doors to the boardroom burst open and 3 FBI agents strode in, followed by 2 Aerodyne security officers gripping a visibly shattered Caleb Warren between them. His once immaculate suit hung crooked, his face streaked with tears, his hands trembling as though the temperature in the room had dropped 50 degrees. "You don't understand," Caleb choked, voice cracking as the agents shoved him forward. "They were going to kill my daughter if I didn't have a choice." His words fell apart under sobs, but the agents ignored him. They were already playing the audio Darius had secretly recorded under the co-pilot seat, Caleb's voice echoing through the speakers. "The hydraulic compound. It'll crystallize at altitude. She won't suffer, just like her father." Executives gasped, stepping back as if Caleb carried a contagion. Darius watched, jaw clenched, as the man collapsed, sobbing into his shaking hands. "She was 8 years old," he whispered. "I owed people money. They showed me photos of her school. They said if I didn't deliver, they'd—" He broke off, shaking violently as the FBI cuffed him, reading him his rights. Megan Ruiz entered quietly behind them, pale but composed, her arms full of folders, the ones Darius had seen earlier. Elias Whitfield's will, internal memos, financial reports. She approached him softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know what you found last night," she said. "Elias—" He suspected Caleb for months. The debts, the meetings, the pressure. Elias was trying to expose him, but before he could, the plane went down. And he left something else. She slid a sealed envelope toward Darius, her hands trembling. "He wrote this for you." Confused, he opened it slowly, scanning the handwritten note inside. "DC, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. Protect Lauren. Trust no one on the board. You see things others miss. I chose you for a reason. Don't let my daughter follow me into the dark." E.W. Darius felt the room tilt. Elias hadn't hired him by accident. He had planted him like a shield inside the empire he knew was compromised. He looked up at Megan, but before he could speak, the boardroom glass trembled with the thundering sound of emergency vehicles below. Lauren had been transported back to the building, bruised but alive. Moments later, she stormed in, wind-blown hair tangled, flight suit scraped, eyes blazing with adrenaline and fury. "Where is he?" she demanded, voice sharp as a blade. "Where is Darius Cole?" The room went silent. Every executive stepped aside as she marched straight toward him, holding up the challenge coin he had left in the cockpit. Her voice broke, not with weakness, but with realization. "You saved my life. You knew something was wrong, and you—" She cut herself off as her eyes scanned the room, landing on Caleb in handcuffs. Then on the FBI agents, then on the printed instructions she had clutched in her pocket. In one breath, she understood everything. The sabotage, the lies, the humiliations she had thrown at the very man who had just risked his life to save hers. Her voice softened, trembling with something he had never heard from her before. "Where did you learn to fly like that?" But before he could answer, the FBI agent beside her stepped forward. Miss Whitfield, we have evidence of organized crime infiltration, insurance fraud, attempted murder, and corporate sabotage. And this man, he pointed at Darius, just gave us the key to the entire operation. Lauren stared at Darius, stunned. The janitor she mocked wasn't a janitor. He was something else entirely. And the truth, now fully exposed, was about to burn through Aerodyne like a wildfire. The moment Lauren processed what she was seeing, Caleb in cuffs, FBI badges flashing, Darius standing there with the calm intensity of someone who had walked through hell long before this day, her entire world tilted on its axis. Yet she forced herself to stay upright as she marched toward him, gripping the challenge coin so tightly it left an imprint in her palm. Darius turned, ready to slip out quietly, but Lauren's voice cracked across the room like a command he could not ignore. Stop. Don't walk away. The executives hovering near the walls held their breath as she approached him. Her scraped flight suit still dusted with dirt from her emergency landing, her hair tangled by rotor wash, her expression raw in a way no one at Aerodyne had ever seen. "You saved my life," she said. Not performative, not dramatic, just honest. Darius shook his head. "I delayed your death, that's all. Real survival was on you." She stared at him as though seeing him for the first time, not as the janitor she mocked, but as the soldier Elias had trusted above every executive in the building. Behind them, FBI agents dragged Caleb toward the elevator, and he twisted back, screaming through tears. "I had no choice, Lauren. They were going to kill Emma. They own judges, politicians. No one is safe, and especially not you, Darius. You just signed your death warrant." But the elevator doors slid shut, cutting off his final warnings, leaving silence thick as smoke. Lauren opened her mouth to speak again, but Darius's voice cut through the tension, low and steady. "You poured coffee on me, made me kneel, fired me, threatened me. When exactly did you expect me to tell you your CFO was planning your murder?" The words struck her harder than the near crash had. Her throat tightened with shame. But before she could respond, Megan Ruiz stepped in, holding a thick folder. "Darius, show her," she said quietly. He hesitated, then handed Lauren Elias's handwritten letter, the one meant for him, the one revealing he had been hired not as a janitor, but as a covert guardian who saw what others missed. Lauren read it once, twice, then pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, eyes flooding with the kind of grief she had never allowed anyone to see. "My father trusted you," she whispered. "He trusted you more than he trusted me." Darius stepped back. "He trusted you too. That's why he hid this from you. He didn't want you to live afraid." Lauren closed her eyes for one trembling second, absorbing the truth. Her father had been murdered, her CFO had been compromised by a criminal network, and the man she humiliated on camera had been the only thing standing between her and the same fate. She opened her eyes as the building's security radios crackled emergency crews, confirming the Falcon's retrieval. Employees gathered behind the glass walls, watching the confrontation unfold like a living headline. Knowing they were being observed, Lauren did something no one expected. She stepped directly in front of Darius, placed the coin back in his hand, and whispered, "Thank you for my life, for my father, for protecting me when I didn't deserve it." Darius looked away, jaw tight. "You don't owe me anything." Lauren shook her head. "I owe you everything." But before she could say more, an SUV with military plates screeched to a stop outside the building, and a man in uniform stepped out. Colonel Raymond Hale, Darius's former commanding officer. He marched through the lobby, eyes locking on to Darius with grim purpose. "Thompson," he said, "your actions today just cracked open a federal investigation. Pack a bag. The government wants to debrief you." Lauren's heart slammed into her ribs. She wasn't losing him now, not after learning who he really was, not after realizing she needed him more than anyone else in her life. Colonel Hale nodded at her. Miss Whitfield, your janitor just saved far more than you realize. Lauren exhaled shakily, staring at Darius not as an employee, not as a subordinate, but as the man who had just rewritten her fate. And she knew the next words she spoke would determine whether he stayed in her life at all. 3 days later, Aerodyne Horizons felt like a different universe, as if the entire building had exhaled and collapsed inward under the weight of its own secrets before slowly rebuilding itself around a new gravitational center: truth. At 9 a.m., the entire staff, from interns to senior engineers to custodial workers, filled the marble atrium, where just days ago Lauren Whitfield had humiliated Darius Cole on camera, unknowingly belittling the very man who would save her life. Now she stood on the raised platform at the front, hair pulled back, exhaustion carved into her features, the vulnerability of someone who had faced death and come back with eyes wide open. She wasn't flanked by executives or PR handlers or legal counsel. She stood alone, a microphone in one trembling hand, the other clutching Elias's sealed letter and the challenge coin Darius had placed in her cockpit. "You've all seen the videos," she began, her voice steady, though her throat tightened. "The one where I humiliated Mr. Cole, and the one where he saved my life." A hush fell over the atrium, heavy with tension and guilt. "I'm not here to justify what happened. I'm here to change what happens next." She clicked the remote in her hand, revealing a slide titled, "The New Aerodyne Initiative Equity, Safety, Honor." "From now on," she declared, "our hiring practices will prioritize real experience, not elitism. Veterans, minorities, career changers, people without Ivy League degrees. We've ignored too many brilliant minds for too long." Employees shifted, murmuring, shocked. "Effective immediately," she continued, "custodial staff will receive full health benefits, a $30 minimum wage, access to mental health services, and tuition sponsorships." Another ripple of stunned reactions. Some executives looked furious, others looked ashamed. And that is only the beginning. She tapped the remote again. The Elias Whitfield Foundation, a scholarship and rehabilitation program for veterans suffering from PTSD, loss of flight certification, or trauma. Our founder believed in second chances. It's time we honor that. She stepped aside, letting the slide illuminate behind her. But she wasn't finished. She scanned the crowd, eyes settling on a familiar face standing in the back. Darius, wearing clean jeans and a dark shirt instead of his janitorial uniform, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Mr. Cole, would you come forward?" she asked. The crowd parted like water as he walked through them, some avoiding his gaze, others offering small nods of respect they should have given him years ago. When he reached the stage, Lauren handed him an envelope. "This is your final custodial paycheck, and the combat pay my father had routed to you through a shell company. 3 years' worth, about $300,000. Darius stared at it, stunned. "I don't want this. It's not optional," she said softly. "It's yours." She turned back to the microphone. "And yes, Mr. Cole is formally fired from his custodial position." Gasps rippled through the atrium before she lifted her chin. "Because I'm offering him a new one. Chief of Flight Safety and Pilot Rehabilitation. Full benefits, $75,000 starting salary. Reports directly to me." The atrium exploded, not with chaos, but applause. Real, raw, relieved. Darius, overwhelmed, raised a hand to quiet them. He pulled a small orange bottle from his pocket. "This is sertraline. For PTSD. I take it every day. If that makes any of you uncomfortable, tell me now." Silence, then voices. Prozac for anxiety. Lexapro. Xanax. Depression. One by one, Aerodyne employees admitted what they had always hidden: their battles, their medication, their truth. Lauren covered her mouth, shaken. "We will cover every mental health treatment from now on, fully. No limits, no stigma." The crowd erupted again. Darius nodded once, meeting her eyes. One more thing. The video of me on my knees. We released the full story. Everything. Caleb's confession. The sabotage. Your father's murder. Lauren's breath caught, but she didn't hesitate. Then we tell the truth. Cameras flashed. Employees cheered. And for the first time in her life, Lauren felt like she was doing something worthy of the empire her father left behind because the man he trusted most was standing beside her. 1 year later, the rooftop helipad of Aerodyne Horizons looked nothing like the place where Lauren Whitfield had once tossed aircraft keys at a janitor for sport. Now it gleamed under the Colorado sun with a sense of purpose, lined with safety railings, new navigation beacons, and a bold metal plaque dedicating the pad to Elias Whitfield and the pilots who had nearly been lost to corporate corruption. Hundreds of employees gathered on the rooftop for the annual Sky Memorial engineers, custodial workers, administrative staff, interns, veterans, standing shoulder to shoulder, united in a way the company had never experienced before. At the center stood a simple podium where Darius Cole adjusted the microphone with steady hands, wearing his first suit in years, the challenge coin tucked into his pocket like a heartbeat. Behind him, 53 graduates of the Elias Whitfield Foundation veterans recovering from PTSD, pilots reclaiming their wings, mechanics rebuilding their futures sat proudly in a row, their newly minted certifications pinned to their jackets. Darius cleared his throat, scanning the faces before him, then began. A year ago, this company didn't know who I was. Hell, I didn't know who I was. I hid behind a mop because I thought that was all I deserved after the mistakes I made overseas. He paused, letting the weight of the admission settle. Trauma isn't loud. It whispers. It tells you you're not worth saving. And I believed it, until a CEO with more arrogance than altitude challenged me to fly a plane she never expected me to step inside. Gentle laughter rippled across the crowd, including from Lauren herself, who stood front row, hands clasped together, eyes bright with emotion rather than pride. Darius continued, "But that challenge, that humiliation, accidentally saved my life, because it forced me to be who I used to be, not who I was pretending to be. It made me step up. It made me act." He glanced over his shoulder at the foundation graduates. "And now you're all stepping up too. You're proof that broken doesn't mean useless. That trauma doesn't mean the end. That everyone in this company, regardless of title, race, rank, or pay grade, deserves to be seen." He looked at Lauren then, and the rooftop quieted. "Your father, Elias, hired me to protect you. But you," he nodded toward her, "protected everyone else. You changed the company. You changed lives. You gave people a way back." Lauren blinked away tears, but she didn't look away. Darius closed his speech with a final truth that silenced the rooftop. We judge too quickly in this world. We assume too much. The janitor you ignore might be the one who saves you. The CEO you resent might be fighting a war you can't see, and the person you think is broken might be the one who puts your aircraft safely on the ground. The crowd erupted into applause, long, thunderous reel. As Darius stepped down, Lauren moved toward him, stopping only a foot away. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Darius shook his head gently. "You saved yourself. I just pointed at the sky." She smiled, the soft, unguarded kind she never used to show, and together they turned toward the rows of veterans, the staff, the rebuilt Aerodyne family. Above them, a Falcon test craft soared in a controlled climb, stable, beautiful, a symbol of a company and a man reborn from fire.